"Take this fat burden off my hands," her father said, but the rancher called her his treasure. In the dust of a frontier street, a drunken father pushes his daughter forward, calling her useless, unwanted nothing but shame. Laughter roars from the saloon doors. Then, one voice cuts through the mockery. A rancher, broad-shouldered and weather-scarred, declaring she's no burden, she's a treasure. But the rancher's land hides a dangerous secret. The railroad wants his water. A rival rancher plots to take it by force. And the father, greedy, bitter, has already sold lies that could destroy everything. Now this unwanted daughter must rise against betrayal, ridicule, and the weight of her past. She holds the only truth that can save the ranch, but if she speaks, the town may turn against her. The church bells toll. Hooves thunder. A council gavel slams. Will the girl cast aside as a burden find the courage to stand tall, or will the frontier break her before she discovers her true worth? Comment below and tell me where in the world you're joining from. And if this story made you pause for a moment, hit that subscribe button for more. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Silver Creek, Colorado. Heat waves shimmered above the packed dirt as townspeople went about their business, the clip-clop of horses and creak of wagon wheels filling the air. Outside the Silver Dollar Saloon, a crowd began to gather, drawn by the sound of angry shouting that a vory stood trembling as her father's rough hands pushed her forward. The stench of whiskey rolled off him in waves as he stumbled, his face flushed an ugly red beneath his unkempt beard. Her cheeks burned with shame as curious onlookers stopped to stare. "Look here," her father bellowed, giving her another harsh shove. "Who'll take this useless girl off my hands? Too fat to work, too stupid to learn." His words slurred together as he swayed on his feet. Avery kept her eyes fixed on the ground, watching dust settle on her worn boots. The crowd grew larger, and cruel laughter rippled through the gathering. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to make herself smaller as her father continued his tirade. "Ain't worth the food she eats." He grabbed her arm roughly. $5, that's all I'm asking for this burden." More jeers erupted from the crowd. Tears stung Avery's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. The wooden boards of the sidewalk blurred beneath her gaze as catcalls and whistles joined the mocking laughter. Then, suddenly, silence fell over the crowd like a heavy blanket. Boot steps approached, slow and deliberate, accompanied by the soft jingle of spurs. Avery sensed rather than saw someone step forward from the edge of the crowd. "She's no burden." The voice rang out clear and steady, cutting through the oppressive. "Quiet, she's a treasure." Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Avery's head jerked up, and she found herself staring at Joshua Matthews, owner of the Pine Creek Ranch. He stood tall and broad-shouldered, his presence commanding respect despite his simple clothes. Weather-worn lines creased the corners of his eyes, and his dark hair showed touches of silver at the temples. But it was the quiet strength in his gaze that held her attention. "What's that?" Her father sneered, though he took an unsteady step backward. Joshua's steady gaze never wavered. As he reached into his vest pocket, "I said she's a treasure." He pulled out a small leather pouch that clinked with coins. "And I won't stand by while you shame her in the street." The crowd shifted uncomfortably as Joshua stepped closer. Some folks looked away, shame crossing their faces as they realized their part in the cruel spectacle. Others watched with rapt attention, hardly daring to breathe. "Here," Joshua held out a handful of coins to Avery's father. "This isn't payment for her. No person can be bought or sold. This is to end this disgraceful display." Her father's bloodshot eyes fixed greedily on the money. He snatched the coins, counting them with trembling fingers. $10, he muttered, "more than she's worth." Joshua's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "Miss Avery," he said, turning to her, "my wagon's just down the street. Would you like a ride home?" Avery's heart hammered in her chest as she looked up at him. His eyes held nothing but kindness, and something inside her chest loosened just a bit. She managed a small nod. "Now see here," her father started to protest. But Joshua cut him off with a look that could have frozen a summer stream. "I believe you have business waiting in the saloon," Joshua said quietly, but with steel in his voice. Her father opened his mouth, then closed it. Without another word, he stumbled back through the swinging doors, the coins clutched in his fist. Crowd began to disperse, conversations buzzing with speculation about what they'd just witnessed. Joshua offered his arm to Avery. "This way, miss." They walked in silence to where his wagon waited, a well-maintained farm wagon hitched to two sturdy bay horses. Joshua helped her up onto the wooden seat, his hands strong but gentle. The leather reins creaked as he settled beside her and clicked to the horses' as they pulled away from the hitching post. Avery heard the whispers following them down the street. But for the first time that afternoon, they weren't cruel whispers. Instead, they spoke of Joshua's unexpected act of decency, of the quiet way he'd stood against injustice. The wagon wheels rattled over the rutted street. Avery sat straight and still, her hands folded in her lap, hardly daring to believe what had just happened. The man beside her said nothing, but his presence felt solid and reassuring. Like a shelter in a storm, they passed the general store, the smithy, and the telegraph office. Each familiar building seemed somehow different now, as if the world had shifted on its axis. Behind them, through the dust kicked up by the wagon wheels, Avery could see the Silver Dollar Saloon growing smaller. Inside, her father would be spending those coins on whiskey, but for once, she found she didn't care. The late afternoon sun painted the mountains gold as Joshua guided the wagon toward the edge of town. A cool breeze carried the scent of pine and sage, and somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark called. Avery took a deep breath, and for the first time that day, it didn't catch in her throat. He had called her a treasure. The words echoed in her mind, warm and startling as summer rain. Not a burden, not useless, but a treasure. She stole a glance at his profile, wondering what had made this respected rancher step forward when everyone else had only laughed. The wagon rolled on, leaving the town and its cruel laughter behind. Ahead, the road stretched toward the mountains, and though Avery didn't know where it would lead, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. The wagon rattled along the dusty road leading out of Silver Creek, wheels crunching over loose stones as dusk painted the sky in deep purples and oranges. Joshua held the reins loosely in his weathered hands, giving Avery time to collect herself after the afternoon's ordeal. The cool evening breeze carried the scent of sage and prairie grass. "Miss Avery," Joshua's voice was gentle, like he was speaking to a spooked horse. "I want to offer you a place at my ranch. There's work to be done, and you'd have a roof over your head." He paused, then added, "But the choice is yours." Avery's fingers twisted in her skirt as she considered his words. The thought of returning to her father's house with its empty whiskey bottles and bitter accusations made her stomach clench. She glanced at Joshua's profile, outlined against the darkening sky. "Yes," she whispered, then cleared her throat and spoke more firmly. "Yes, I'd like that." Joshua nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "Good." He clicked to the horses, urging them on as the last rays of sunlight gilded the distant mountains. The road stretched before them, winding through rolling hills dotted with scrub brush and juniper trees. The steady clip-clop of hooves and creak of leather filled the comfortable silence between them. As the first stars began to appear in the deepening twilight, Joshua spoke again, his voice carrying a weight of memory. "I reckon you should know about my family," he said quietly. "My wife Sarah and our boy Thomas. They're buried up on the north ridge of the ranch." His hands tightened briefly on the reins. "Fever took them both 3 years ago. I keep fresh flowers on their graves every Sunday." Avery's heart ached at the grief in his voice. "I'm sorry," she offered softly. "I lost my mother 2 years past." "Was she the one who taught you your letters?" Joshua asked. "Yes, and more." Avery straightened slightly with pride. "She was clerk to a merchant back east before marrying father. She taught me bookkeeping, double-entry ledgers, accounts receivable, everything she knew." Joshua turned to look at her, genuine interest in his expression. "That's a rare skill for anyone out here, let alone a young woman. Could be mighty useful on a ranch." The wagon crested a rise, and suddenly the ranch spread out before them in the gathering darkness. A weathered 2-story house stood solid against the night sky, warm lamplight spilling from its windows. A barn and several outbuildings clustered nearby, and in the distance, fence lines stretched into the shadows as they pulled up to the house. The front door opened, spilling more light onto the packed earth of the yard. A woman emerged, tall and straight-backed, wearing a practical skirt and shirt, her black hair bound in a long braid. Avery recognized her as Navajo by her silver jewelry and the traditional sash at her waist. "Joshua," the woman called out, "you're late for supper." Her voice held warmth and a hint of teasing. "I was about to feed your share to the dogs." "Lena," Joshua replied with a chuckle, "you wouldn't dare." He helped Avery down from the wagon. "This here is Miss Avery. She be staying with us." Lena's dark eyes were kind as she looked Avery over. "Welcome," she said simply. "There's plenty of stew left and fresh bread too. Come eat." Inside, the house was plain but well kept. A long table dominated the kitchen, its surface scarred from years of use but scrubbed clean. Lena ladled thick stew into bowls while Joshua sliced bread still warm from the oven. The familiar domestic scene eased something tight in Avery's chest. Sit, Lena urged, placing a full bowl before her. "You're too thin. We'll fix that." Avery hadn't realized how hungry she was until the rich smell of the stew hit her nose. She took a careful spoonful, then another, and another. The meat was tender, the vegetables perfectly cooked, and the broth seasoned with unfamiliar spices that made her tongue tingle pleasantly. "Joshua," Lena said as she sat down with her own bowl, "did you remember to check the north pasture fence like I told you?" Joshua looked sheepish. "I might have forgotten." "Ha," Lena shook her head. "What would you do without me to remind you of these things? Your cattle would be halfway to Kansas by now." Their easy banter brought a small smile to Avery's face. She watched as Joshua defended himself good-naturedly while Lena listed off all the times his forgetfulness had caused trouble. The tension of the day began to melt away in the warm kitchen dot after supper. Joshua showed Avery to a small room on the second floor. It was simple, a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, a chair by the window, but clean and cozy. A patchwork quilt covered the bed, and a rag rug softened the wooden floor. "It's not much," Joshua said, setting her small carpet bag beside the door. "But it's yours for as long as you want it." "Thank you," Avery managed, her throat tight with emotion. "It's perfect." Once alone, Avery changed into her nightgown and knelt beside the bed. The floorboards were smooth under her knees as she folded her hands in prayer. The words came hesitantly at first, then faster as she poured out her heart. "Lord," she whispered, "I don't understand why this man showed me kindness when others only laughed. Why did he call me a treasure? Please help me be worthy of his trust." Through the window, she could see stars scattered across the vast Colorado sky. The house creaked gently as it settled, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. Strange sounds in a strange place, yet somehow Avery felt safer than she had in years. She climbed into bed, pulling the quilt up to her chin. The pillow was soft, smelling faintly of lavender and sunshine. As she drifted toward sleep, Avery wondered what tomorrow would bring in this new life she'd chosen, a life where someone had looked past her father's cruel words and seen something worth-saving. Morning light crept through the small window of Avery's room, painting golden stripes across her quilt. A rooster's crow pierced the dawn quiet, followed by the rich aroma of coffee drifting up from below. She blinked awake, momentarily confused by the unfamiliar ceiling beams above her head. Then yesterday's memories flooded back: her father's cruel display, Joshua's intervention, the long wagon ride to this ranch. The floorboards were cool under her feet as she dressed quickly in her work dress, fingers fumbling with the familiar buttons. From downstairs came the clatter of pots and the murmur of voices. Avery took a deep breath, smoothed her hair, and made her way down to the kitchen. Lena stood at the large cast-iron stove, her long black braids swinging as she moved between tasks. The kitchen was already warm from the fire, and the air was thick with the smell of coffee and wood smoke. "Good morning," Lena said without turning around. "Sleep well?" "Yes, thank you." Avery hovered uncertainly in the doorway until Lena gestured her closer. "Come, I'll show you how breakfast works here." Lena pointed to a large bowl of biscuit dough. "We feed 6 ranch hands besides ourselves, and they're all hungry as bears in the morning." Avery rolled up her sleeves. "My mother taught me to make biscuits. May I help?" Surprise and approval flickered across Lena's face. "Show me what you can do." With practiced movements, Avery began cutting the dough into rounds, placing them neatly on the baking sheet. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, A good biscuit needs a light touch, child. Handle the dough too much and they'll come out hard as rocks. Lena nodded approvingly as she tended the beans simmering in their pot and turned thick slices of bacon in a heavy skillet. Together, they worked in comfortable silence, moving around each other as if they'd done this dance for years instead of minutes. The kitchen door swung open and Joshua stepped in from the early morning chill. He stopped short at the sight of them working together, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Smells like heaven in here," he said, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "Miss Avery knows her way around a kitchen," Lena replied, sliding the biscuits into the oven. "These might even be better than mine." Avery felt her cheeks warm at the praise. "My mother believed every woman should know how to run a proper kitchen, no matter what else she learned." "Smart woman," Joshua said. He set his coffee cup down. "Miss Avery, after breakfast, I'd like to show you the ranch if you're willing to ride out with me." Avery's stomach fluttered with nerves. I've never ridden a horse alone before. Only in carriages or wagons." "Don't worry," Joshua assured her. "I've got just the Mari for you, gentle as a lamb." The ranch hands filed in soon after, stamping dust from their boots and washing up at the pump outside. They were polite but curious, stealing glances at Avery as they filled their plates. She kept her eyes on her own food, remembering yesterday's jeering crowd. But these men showed only quiet respect. After the dishes were cleared and the hands headed out to their morning tasks, Joshua led Avery to the barn. The familiar scents of hay and leather filled the cool shadows. He stopped before a stall housing a dappled gray Mare with kind eyes. "This is Daisy," Joshua said, running a hand down the horse's neck. "She's steady and sure-footed, perfect for learning." He demonstrated how to saddle her, his movements precise and practiced. Avery watched carefully, trying to memorize each step. When it came time to mount, Joshua's strong hands steadied her waist as she settled into the saddle. Her heart jumped at the contact, but his touch was purely practical, making sure she was secure. "Hold the reins like this," he instructed, adjusting her grip. "Not too tight, she needs to feel you trust her." They set out at a walk, Joshua leading them away from the ranch buildings and into the rolling grassland beyond. The morning sun warmed Avery's shoulders as Daisy's steady gait carried her forward. Gradually, her death grip on the saddle horn relaxed. "You're doing fine," Joshua encouraged, riding beside her on his own horse. "Just move with her rhythm." They crested a gentle hill, and Joshua reined in his mount. Below them, a creek wound through the valley like a silver ribbon, its banks lined with cottonwoods. Cattle grazed in the lush grass nearby, their red-brown coats gleaming in the morning light. "That's Joshua Creek," he said, his voice turning serious. "Named by my father when he first settled here. That water's the lifeblood of this ranch keeps. The cattle fat and the grass growing." He paused, scanning the horizon. "But lately, there's been trouble." "What kind of trouble?" Avery asked, sensing the weight in his words. "Man named Halpern owns the spread north of here. He's been trying to divert the creek, claim more water rights for himself." Joshua's jaw tightened, and now the railroad's pushing through. There. Agents have been sniffing around, talking about buying up water claims all along the line. Avery studied the creek, thinking of ledger books and water rights. "Do you have proper documentation for your claim to the water?" Joshua looked at her sharply. "Some. My father wasn't much for paperwork, and I'm no better." "Why?" "Because proper records could protect you," Avery said, warming to the subject. "My mother taught me about legal documents, how to organize them, what details matter most. A thoughtful expression crossed Joshua's weathered face. "That knowledge might come in mighty handy, Miss Avery." They rode on, Joshua pointing out property lines and grazing areas. By the time they turned back toward the ranch, the sun was high overhead and Avery's muscles ached from hours in the saddle. Still, pride bloomed in her chest. She'd done it. Had really ridden a horse all on her own. Evening found them gathered around the kitchen table again, bowls of Lena's hearty stew warming their hands. The lamp cast a gentle glow over their faces as they talked about the day's work. Avery's bones were weary, but it was a good kind of tired, earned through honest labor. Joshua spoke of fence repairs needed in the north pasture, while Lena added items to a growing list of supplies they'd need from town. Avery listened, soaking in their easy companionship. their simple grace in sharing work and bread and conversation. When the lamp began to burn low, Avery excused herself, her steps heavy as she climbed the stairs to her room. But her heart felt lighter than it had in years. Here was purpose. Here was respect. And in Joshua's steady presence, something else stirred, something warm and unexpected that she wasn't quite ready to name. Through her window, the stars wheeled, bright and clear over the Colorado night. The day's images played through her mind, sunrise on biscuit dough, Joshua's hands showing her how to hold the reins, the silver thread of the creek running through his land. She had begun to find her place here, one small task at a time. Sleep came easily, bringing dreams of running water and gentle horses, of strong hands and kind eyes that saw treasure where others had seen only burden. Dawn painted the sky in soft pinks and golds as Joshua hitched the horses to his water wagon. The wooden barrels rattled empty against their stays, a hollow sound that echoed across the yard. Avery stepped out of the kitchen door, wrapping her shawl tight against the morning chill. "I'll help with the water hauling," she said, her voice firm despite the early hour. Joshua paused in his work, studying her with concern. "It's heavy labor, Miss Avery. Those barrels weigh plenty when they're full." "I'm stronger than I look," she replied, squaring her shoulders. "And I want to earn my keep." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Reckon there's no talking you out of it, then." He offered his hand to help her up onto the wagon seat. The horses' hooves kicked up dust as they followed the rutted trail toward Joshua Creek. Morning light filtered through the cottonwoods, casting dappled shadows across their path. The wagon creaked and swayed beneath them. "The creek's running low," Joshua explained, gesturing ahead. "Been a dry season. That's why every drop matters more than usual." They reached the creek bank, where the water ran clear and swift between moss-covered rocks. Joshua jumped down and began positioning the first barrel. Avery climbed down more carefully, but moved with determination to help. Together they worked out a system. Joshua would fill each barrel while Avery guided the flow of water through the canvas hose, minimizing spillage. When it came time to lift the barrels back onto the wagon, she insisted on helping there too, throwing her weight against the wooden sides while Joshua heaved from below. The sun had climbed higher when they heard hoofbeats approaching. Joshua straightened, his expression hardening as a rider emerged from the tree line. The man sat tall in his saddle, wearing a fine black hat and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. His horse, a sleek bay stallion, pranced nervously as he reined to a stop. "Well now, Joshua," the man drawled, "ain't this a pretty morning for water hauling?" His sharp gaze shifted to Avery, calculating and cold. "Halpern." Joshua's voice was flat. "You're a ways from your own creek." "Just riding my property line." Halpern's smirk widened. "Checking what's mine and what soon will be. Railroad's buying up water rights all along this stretch. Smart man would sell while the price is good." "This water's not for sale," Joshua said quietly. "Never has been, never will be." Halpern clicked his tongue. "Might not be your choice much longer. Heard some interesting news in town yesterday. Seems a certain gentleman signed some papers regarding debts against this land." His eyes slid meaningfully to Avery. "Family matters can get so complicated, can't they?" Avery felt her face flush hot with shame and anger. Joshua's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice steady. "If you're done delivering threats, we've got work to finish. Just trying to help a neighbor see reason." Halpern touched the brim of his hat in mock courtesy. "Think on it, Joshua. Railroad don't take kindly to being refused." He wheeled his horse around and rode away, leaving dust and tension hanging in the air. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them lost in thought. As they unloaded the water barrels, Avery finally spoke. "My father kept ledgers," she said softly. "He thought I didn't know about them, but I studied them when he was drinking. I might be able to help prove if Halpern's lying about those debts." Joshua set down the barrel he was moving. "You know how to read those kinds of documents?" Avery nodded. "Mother taught me bookkeeping proper, and I learned more watching Father's mistakes. The way he tried to hide money, forge signatures, change dates. I know what to look for." Something like hope flickered in Joshua's eyes. "Would you be willing to look through my papers? After supper, maybe?" "Of course," Avery said. "I want to help." The day passed in a blur of regular ranch work. Avery helped Lena with the washing, all the while her mind turning over numbers and dates, remembering her father's crooked schemes. When evening finally came, her hands trembled slightly with anticipation. After the supper dishes were cleared, Joshua brought out a wooden box filled with papers. Land deeds, water rights, old contracts, all scattered and disorganized. He set a lamp on the kitchen table, and they sat side by side, shoulders nearly touching as they began to sort through the documents. Avery worked methodically, creating neat piles by date and type. Her fingers traced each signature, each official seal. "Here," she said after a while, pulling out 2 papers. "These water rights are dated differently, but they're written in the same hand. See how the numbers slant?" Joshua leaned closer, squinting at the documents. "I never would have noticed that. And look at this deed," Avery continued, warming to her task. "The paper's newer than the dated claims. See how white it is? Old papers yellow more." She kept working, finding more discrepancies, her confidence growing with each discovery. The lamp burned lower as they worked, casting warm light across the scattered papers. Joshua watched her hands move surely through the documents, his expression softening with something like wonder. "Treasure indeed," he murmured, so quietly she almost missed it. Avery's cheeks flushed warm at the words, remembering that first day in town. She ducked her head, but a smile tugged at her lips. For the first time in her life, someone saw her. Mind as valuable, her knowledge as worth something. In the doorway, Lena paused on her way to her own quarters. She watched them bend over their work, heads close together in the lamplight, and a knowing smile spread across her face. Without a word, she slipped away, leaving them to their shared task and the quiet understanding growing between them. The eastern sky barely showed its first blush of pink when Lena knocked softly on Avery's door. "Time to learn," she called, her voice warm but firm. Avery dressed quickly, wrapping herself in a borrowed shawl against the pre-dawn chill. She followed Lena's lantern light across the yard to the weathered barn, where the sweet smell of hay mingled with leather and livestock. "First task of morning, always check the tack," Lena explained, lifting a saddle from its stand. She ran her hands over the leather, showing Avery how to look for wear. "See here? The stitching's coming loose. Could hurt horse and rider both if we don't mend it." They sat together on hay bales, the lantern casting dancing shadows on the barn walls. Lena demonstrated how to work the heavy leather needle, her fingers swift and sure. "My grandmother taught me this," she said, her voice soft with memory. "Said a woman who can mend what's broken will never be helpless." Avery's first attempts were clumsy, but Lena nodded approvingly at her determination. As they worked, Lena shared stories passed down through generations of Navajo women. "There was one," Lena said, testing a repaired strap, "who walked 3 days through snow when soldiers took her people's sheep. They laughed at her, called her foolish. But she stood straight, spoke true, and brought those sheep home." Her dark eyes met Avery's. "Sometimes people mock what they don't understand. Their words show their weakness, not yours." The morning sun was streaming through the barn slats when they moved to the cow pen. Lena positioned Avery's hands on the first cow's udder, showing her how to establish a gentle rhythm. "Too rough, she kick. Too timid, you'll be here all day," Lena explained. "Find the middle way." As warm milk hissed into the pail, Lena told more stories of grandmothers who kept their dignity through hardship, of aunts who taught their children to walk in beauty despite others' scorn. Avery listened, drawing strength from these tales of quiet courage. The morning passed in peaceful work until hoofbeats in the yard announced Joshua's return from town. Something in his expression made both women pause as they carried the milk pails to the house. "Railroads made their move," he said grimly, dismounting. "Filed claims on the creek water rights. There's to be a council hearing in 3 days' time." Avery's stomach tightened with anxiety, but she lifted her chin. "We have proof of tampering in those documents we found. They can't just take what's yours." Joshua's weathered face softened slightly. "What's ours?" he corrected. "This fight belongs to all of us now." They gathered around the kitchen table as Joshua explained what he'd learned in town. The railroad had brought in lawyers from Denver, men with sharp suits and sharper tongues. They'd filed stacks of papers, claiming prior water rights through a maze of purchases and transfers. "They're counting on overwhelming the council with legal talk," Joshua said. spreading out the documents they'd analyzed the night before. "But if we can show how these dates don't match up, we will," Avery said firmly, though her hands trembled slightly as she sorted through the papers. Truth has to count for something. The afternoon passed in careful preparation, with Avery making neat copies of their evidence while Joshua and Lena tended to essential ranch work. The sun was setting when they finally stopped to eat. At the supper table, Joshua bowed his head as usual for grace. But tonight, his prayer was different. "Lord," he began, his deep voice gentle, "we thank you for this food, for the work of our hands, and for bringing Avery to our home. Bless her courage and wisdom as we face what's ahead. Help us all stand firm for what's right. Amen." Avery blinked hard, her throat tight with emotion. No one had ever prayed for her by name before, with such simple tenderness. She kept her head bowed an extra moment, not trusting herself to speak. After the dishes were done, Avery took a lantern and slipped outside. She needed space to think, to breathe, to prepare her heart for the battle ahead. The evening air was cool and sweet with sage as she walked slowly through the pasture. Stars were beginning to prick through the darkening sky, bright and steady. Avery stopped at the pasture fence, setting her lantern on a post. The flame barely flickered in the still air. "Lord," she whispered, echoing Joshua's earlier prayer, "give me courage. Help me be worthy of this place, these people." She drew a deep breath, savoring the scent of grass and earth. "Help me stand firm." She didn't hear Joshua's approach until he spoke quietly beside her. "You belong here." Avery turned, caught by the gentle certainty in his voice. The lantern light caught the silver threading through his dark hair, the kindness in his eyes. Small smile touched her lips, warming her heart. For the first time since her mother died, she felt truly at home. Not just shelter, but belonging. Not just safety, but purpose. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge. The distant howl of a coyote floated across the darkened pasture. In 3 days they would face the railroad's lawyers and all their fancy papers. But tonight, in this moment, Avery knew with bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The lantern flame danced gently, casting their shadows long across the grass. Neither felt the need to speak further. The quiet understanding between them said everything necessary. The stars still glittered like ice in the black sky when Joshua's wagon rolled out of the ranch yard. Lanterns swayed from hooks on either side, casting pools of shifting light across the packed dirt. Avery sat between Joshua and Lena on the wooden seat, the strong box with their precious documents secured beneath their feet. Morning frost had silvered the grass, crunching under the wagon wheels. Avery pulled her borrowed shawl tighter, grateful for its warmth. The leather reins creaked in Joshua's steady hands as he guided the team forward. 2 days' journey at wagon pace, he said quietly, his breath visible in the cold air. The line, "Shack will give us shelter tonight." Lena passed around cups of coffee from a tin pot she'd prepared before they left. The hot liquid warmed Avery's hands through the thick ceramic. She sipped carefully as the wagon swayed, watching the eastern sky slowly lighten from black to deep blue. The sun rose as they crossed the first ridge, painting the clouds in streaks of pink and gold. The road stretched ahead like a pale ribbon, through the grass rutted from summer rains and winter freezes. Every bump jarred the wagon, making the strong box shift beneath their feet. "Railroad men probably taking them fancy railroad cars," Lena remarked, adjusting her seat on the hard bench. "While we bounce along like beans in a bucket." Joshua's mouth quirked slightly. "Reckon that's why they want our water so bad. Their steam engines are thirsty beasts." They stopped briefly at midday to rest the horses and share a cold meal of biscuits and dried apple slices. Avery stretched her legs, working out the stiffness from hours of sitting. The autumn wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and distant snow. The afternoon brought darker skies and a sharper wind. The horses plodded steadily onward as shadows lengthened across the land. Just before dusk, Joshua turned the wagon onto a narrower track. "Line shack's just ahead," he said, pointing to a dark shape against the dimming sky. "Not much, but it'll keep us warm and dry." The small cabin emerged from the gloom, a simple structure of rough-hewn logs with a tin roof. Joshua and Lena moved with practiced efficiency, unhitching the horses and setting up camp while Avery gathered kindling for the fireplace. Inside, The cabin was spare but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with bunks built into another. A rough table with 3 mismatched chairs stood in the center. Lena soon had a fire crackling, its light dancing on the log walls. They shared a simple supper of cornbread and jerky, supplemented with the last of their morning coffee. The wind sang around the cabin's corners as they ate, but the fire kept them warm. After the meal, Joshua carefully checked the strongbox's contents one more time, making sure no dampness had reached the important papers. Avery watched him sort through the documents they'd organized so carefully, her stomach tightening at the thought of tomorrow's confrontation. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows when Avery finally spoke the fear that had been growing all day. "Last time I was in town," she swallowed hard, the memory of her father's cruel display still raw. Everyone saw. Everyone laughed. Lena reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "That was then. You're different now. They'll remember." Though Avery's voice was barely above a whisper. "They'll whisper and point. Let them." Joshua's deep voice was firm but gentle. "You'll stand taller than them all." He met her eyes across the firelight. "You're not that scared girl anymore. You're a woman fighting for what's right." Avery drew a shaky breath, drawing strength from his steady gaze. "I just don't want to shame you, after all you've done for me." "Shame?" Joshua shook his head. "You've brought nothing but honor to my home. Your quick mind found the proof we needed. Your strong heart chose to fight instead of run." His voice softened. "You're still my treasure, Avery. Nothing knows town." "Gossip say can change that." Lena nodded approval. "My grandmother would say you walk in beauty now. Head high, spirit strong." They settled into their sleeping places, Joshua near the door, Lena and Avery sharing the bunks. The fire died to glowing coals as wind sighed in the chimney. Avery lay awake for a long time, listening to the night sounds and gathering her courage. For tomorrow. Dawn came early, pale light seeping through the cabin's single window. They ate a quick breakfast of leftover cornbread and coffee before hitching up the team. The morning air was sharp with frost as the wagon rolled back onto the main road. The sun climbed higher as they traveled, warming the day slightly. Avery watched familiar landmarks appear: the lightning-struck oak, the 3-pronged cactus, the stone marker showing 10 miles to town. Her hands clasped tightly in her lap as the distance shortened. Finally, the town's church steeple appeared on the horizon. Avery sat straighter on the wagon seat, squaring her shoulders. She caught Joshua watching her and managed a small smile. "Ready?" he asked quietly. She nodded, though her heart hammered. "Ready." The wagon wheels clattered onto Main Street's packed dirt, the sound drawing attention from every porch and doorway. Heads turned. Fingers pointed. Whispers rippled down the street like wind through wheat. But this time was different. This time, Avery wasn't a spectacle to be mocked. She sat tall beside Joshua, her borrowed shawl neat around her shoulders, her head held high. She was no longer the girl they'd laughed at outside the saloon. She was a woman with purpose, with dignity, with a home and family to fight for. The wagon rolled steadily forward through the whispers and stares, its precious cargo of truth secure beneath their feet. Avery felt Joshua's quiet strength beside her, Lena's fierce pride behind her. Together, they would face whatever came next. Morning sun caught the brass fittings on the strongbox, making them gleam like hope itself as the wagon continued down Main Street. Toward their appointment with Justice. The courthouse loomed before them, its wooden steps worn smooth by years of boots. Inside, the council chamber buzzed with whispers as Joshua, Avery, and Lena took their seats on the pine benches. Morning light streamed through tall windows, catching dust motes and golden shafts. 2 railroad agents sat at a table near the front, their dark suits dark against the room's weathered wood. Their leather briefcases gleamed with brass fixtures, a display of Eastern wealth. Behind them, Halpern lounged on a bench, his mouth curved in a knowing smirk. The council filed in, 5 men in their Sunday best, led by Mayor Thompson. His gavel cracked against the wooden block, bringing silence to the crowded room. "We're here to address water rights claims on Joshua Crawford's Creek," the mayor announced, his voice filling the chamber. "Railroad representatives, you may present your case." The taller agent rose smoothly, adjusting his vest. "Thank you, gentlemen." He withdrew crisp papers from his briefcase. We have documents showing legitimate purchase of water rights through debt transfer." His polished boots clicked on the floorboards as he approached the council table. "Mr. Crawford's neighbor sold these debts to us legally." Avery's hands tightened in her lap as her father's name was mentioned. The second agent produced more papers, spreading them before the council with practiced precision. "As you can see," he continued, "the amounts are clearly stated. Mr. Crawford's property served as collateral on these loans. With the transfer of debt, the water rights now belong to the railroad." Joshua stood, his weathered face calm despite the tension in his shoulders. "Those claims are false." His voice carried steady and strong. "I've never borrowed money from Avery's father. Never signed any papers with him." Halpern's laugh cut through the room. "Convenient to deny it now, Crawford. But the documents don't lie." The mayor studied the papers, frowning. "These appear to be in order. Do you have any evidence to counter these claims?" Joshua nodded slowly. "I do." He turned toward Avery, his eyes gentle. "If you're ready." Avery's heart hammered against her ribs as she rose. Her legs trembled beneath her skirts, but she forced herself to walk forward. The strong box felt heavy in her arms. "Gentlemen," she began, her voice barely a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again, stronger this time. "I grew up watching my father's business dealings." The words came easier as she focused on the truth she needed to share. "My mother taught me bookkeeping before she passed. I know his records better than anyone." She opened the strongbox, withdrawing her mother's careful ledger pages. Her fingers traced a familiar handwriting for courage. "These are the original records." She laid them on the council table. "If you compare the dates and amounts, you'll see the railroad's documents don't match. The debts they claim were sold." She pointed to specific entries. "They never existed." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The railroad agents exchanged sharp glances. Halpern's smirk faltered. "Furthermore," Avery continued, her voice growing stronger, "here are the true records of my father's dealings for those months. No loans to Joshua Crawford. No water rights to sell." She spread out more pages, each one damning in its clarity. "These documents the railroad holds are fabricated." The council members bent over the ledgers, comparing dates and numbers. The railroad agents shifted uncomfortably. Halpern's face had darkened to an angry red dot. Mayor Thompson studied the papers intently before looking up. "These are serious accusations, miss. We'll need time to verify these records properly." He lifted his gavel. "I'm adjourning this session until tomorrow morning. Council members will review all documents presented." The gavel cracked down. "Will reconvene at 9 o'clock. The crowd rose in a flutter of whispers and rustling cloth. Avery's hands shook as she gathered her mother's ledgers, tucking them carefully back into the strongbox. She could feel eyes on her from every direction. Outside the courthouse, autumn sunlight warmed the wooden sidewalk. Townsfolk gathered in small clusters, their murmured conversations following Avery down the steps. But the whispers were different. Now surprise instead of mockery, respect mixing with curiosity. Joshua's hand settled on her shoulder, strong and reassuring. "You did well," he murmured, "more than well." "You were magnificent." Lena squeezed her other arm. "Told you you'd stand tall." A woman in a neat gray dress approached them, her kind face creased in a welcoming smile. "I'm Mrs. Peterson, the pastor's wife," she said warmly. "The parsonage has plenty of room if you need lodging for the night." Joshua tipped his hat. "Much obliged, ma'am. We'd be honored." The parsonage sat beside the white-painted church, its small garden still bright with late autumn flowers. Mrs. Peterson showed them inside, where delicious smells wafted from the kitchen. "I'm making chicken and dumplings," she said. "More than enough to share." "Please, let me help," Avery offered, following her to the kitchen. The familiar tasks of cooking settled her nerves, chopping vegetables, rolling dough, stirring the bubbling pot. Mrs. Peterson chatted easily as they worked, asking about life on Joshua's ranch. "It must have taken great courage," she said quietly, as they set the table, standing up there today. Avery smoothed a napkin, considering. "I was terrified," she admitted, "but the truth needed telling." Mrs. Peterson nodded approvingly. "Sometimes that's what courage is, being afraid but doing what's right anyway." The kitchen filled with warmth and good smells as they finished cooking. Joshua and Lena joined them, along with the pastor. They gathered around the table, heads bowed as the pastor offered grace. Lord, he prayed, thank you for bringing these friends to our table. Guide us all in the pursuit of truth and justice. Amen. The meal was simple but delicious. Conversation flowed easily, touching on ranch life, the changing seasons, stories of the town's early days. No one mentioned the morning's confrontation or tomorrow's decision. For a few peaceful hours, they simply shared food and fellowship. After the dishes were done, Avery stood at the parsonage window, watching darkness settle over the town. Street lamps flickered to life one by one. Her reflection in the glass showed a different person than the girl who'd once been mocked on these streets. Someone stronger, someone with purpose. She could feel both terror and triumph fluttering in her chest. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But tonight, in this warm kitchen with these good people, she knew she'd found her way home. Dawn crept over the horizon in pale fingers of light. The parsonage kitchen was quiet save for the soft clink of coffee cups and morning prayers when morning mornage kitchen was quiet save for the soft clink of coffee cups and morning prayers when Fazenage. Urgent knocking rattled the front door. Mrs. Peterson hurried to answer, returning with a yellow telegram slip held carefully in both hands. For you, Mr. Crawford, she said, her face pinched with worry. Joshua took the paper, his weathered fingers unfolding it slowly. As he read, the color drained from his face. The wells run dry, he said, his voice rough. Bone dry, according to my neighbor checking the stock. Avery set down her coffee cup with trembling hands. A dry well meant dying cattle, withering crops, no water for cooking or washing. In the arid Colorado territory, it spelled disaster. That well's never failed, Joshua continued, crumpling the telegram. Not in 15 years, someone's interfered with it. Lena's dark eyes flashed. Halpern, we need to go. Joshua pushed back from the table. Mrs. Peterson, we're much obliged for your hospitality, but of course. The pastor's wife was already wrapping bread and cheese in a cloth. Take this for the journey. We'll pray for you. They loaded the wagon in record time. The strong box of ledgers secured beneath the seat. The morning air was crisp and sharp as Joshua snapped the reins, urging the horses into a trot. Behind them, the sun climbed higher over the quiet town. What about the council meeting? Avery asked, gripping the seat as they bounced over a rut. Mayor Thompson will have to understand, Joshua replied grimly. Without water, we'll lose everything anyway. The journey that had taken 2 leisurely days now became a race against time. Joshua pushed the horses as fast as he dared, stopping only briefly to water them and let them rest. They ate Mrs. Peterson's bread on the move, dust coating their throats. Shadows stretched long across the prairie when they finally turned onto Joshua's land. The cattle were bunched nervously near the empty water troughs, lowing in distress. Joshua's jaw tightened at the sight. As they approached the creek that fed his land, voices carried on the evening air. Male laughter, the clang of metal on stone. Joshua reined the horses to a stop, lifting a hand for silence. Through the gathering dusk, they could make out several mounted figures near the creek bed. Shovels glinted in the last rays of sunlight. Even from a distance, Halpern's voice carried clearly, drawling orders to his men. Joshua handed the reins to Lena and swung down from the wagon. His boots struck the earth with purpose as he strode toward the creek, Avery hurrying to follow despite her trembling knees. Halpern! Joshua's voice cracked like thunder across the distance. The men turned, startled. Halpern's face split in a mocking grin as he recognized Joshua. Well, if it ain't the water-rich rancher himself, though I reckon you're not so water-rich today. Get off my land. Joshua's words were ice-cold. Remove whatever you've done to block my creek. Halpern made a show of looking around. Your creek? Don't see your name on it. Besides, he patted his saddlebag, I've got papers saying different. Papers built on lies. Avery spoke up, her voice stronger than she felt. The council will see that tomorrow. The council? Halpern laughed and his men joined in. Awful. Shame you'll miss that meeting, being busy with your water troubles and all. He wheeled his horse around. Boys, I believe our work here is done. The mounted men followed their boss, hooves thundering past Joshua and Avery. Their laughter echoed back through the deepening dark, along with Halpern's parting shot. Better start praying for rain, Crawford. When the riders were gone, Joshua walked slowly to the creek bed. The usually clear channel was choked with rocks and dirt, diverted upstream by crude earthworks. The trickle that remained wouldn't water a single cow. Joshua removed his hat, bowing his head. His voice rose quiet but firm in the twilight air. Lord, you know the truth of this land and these waters. You see the wickedness meant to destroy us. Grant us strength to endure, wisdom to find a path forward, and faith to trust in your justice. Avery moved to his side, laying a gentle hand on his arm. The touch carried all the comfort she couldn't put into words. We'll win this fight, she promised softly, however long it takes. Joshua covered her hand with his own rough palm warm against her skin. Thank you, he whispered. Then, squaring his shoulders, best get back to the house. There's work to be done. The ranch house stood dark and silent, no welcoming lamplight in the windows. Inside, they ate a cold supper of Mrs. Peterson's bread and the last of the cheese. Too tired to light the stove. Lena went to check on the horses while Joshua studied his maps by lantern light, looking for other water sources. Unable to sleep, Avery sat by her bedroom window, watching the stars emerge one by one. The vastness of the night sky usually brought her peace, but tonight it only emphasized how small and vulnerable they were against. Halpern Scheme's dot movement caught her eye, a lone figure walking out past the corrals. Joshua's shape was unmistakable. In the starlight as he stopped and removed his hat, his head bowed, shoulders straight despite the day's defeat. No words carried to where Avery watched, but she could feel the power of his silent communion with God. Pressing her palm to the cool glass, Avery closed her eyes and added her own whispered prayer to his. Lord, give us strength. Show us the way through this valley. Let right prevail over wrong, truth over lies, justice over greed. And please, she hesitated, then continued softly, please keep him safe. The night wind sighed through the cottonwoods, carrying the worried lowing of thirsty cattle. But in that moment, their separate prayers seemed to twine together, rising like smoke to the star-strewn heavens too, hearts united in faith despite the darkness gathering around them. Dawn broke harsh and unforgiving over the drought-stricken ranch. The sun hadn't yet cleared the eastern hills when the desperate lowing of cattle shattered the morning quiet. Their calls echoed across the pastures, a mournful chorus that spoke of deepening thirst. Avery woke to the sound, her heart heavy. She dressed quickly in her work dress and hurried downstairs, finding Joshua and Lena already gathered at the kitchen table. Their faces were grim in the pale light filtering through unwashed windows. I checked the blocked creek at first light, Lena reported, her hands wrapped around a steaming coffee cup. Halpern's men did their work well. It would take days to clear those rocks, and they'd just block it again. She paused, dark eyes serious. There's a spring about 4 miles east in the hills. We could haul water from there, but it'll be hard. Going? Joshua nodded slowly, studying the dregs in his cup. No choice. The cattle won't last another day without water. He looked up at Avery. You should stay here, keep an eye on things. This isn't women's work. I'm coming, Avery said firmly, squaring her shoulders. You'll need every pair of hands you can get. Joshua started to protest, but something in her steady gaze made him stop. After a moment, he gave a short nod. All right, but it'll be brutal work in this heat. They hitched the horses to 2 wagons, each fitted with empty barrels. The morning air was already warming as they set out, dust rising beneath the wagon wheels. Avery sat beside Joshua on the lead wagon while Lena handled the second. The cattle's desperate calls faded behind them. As they followed a rough trail into the hills, the spring lay hidden in a shallow canyon, clear water bubbling from between rocks. The sight of it made Avery's throat ache with thirst. But there was no time to rest. They had to fill the barrels quickly before the sun climbed too high. Here, Joshua said, handing her a bucket. We'll form a line, pass them up to the wagons. The work was punishing. They hauled bucket after bucket, the water sloshing over their boots. The sun rose mercilessly overhead, beating down on their backs as they worked. Sweat soaked through Avery's dress, and her arms trembled with fatigue. Still, she refused to stop. Take a break, Joshua urged when he saw her stumble. You've done more than enough. Avery shook her head, reaching for another bucket. The cattle need water. I won't quit. Hours crawled by as they filled barrel after barrel. The spring's output was slow, making them wait between buckets. By mid-afternoon, the wagons were finally loaded. Joshua checked the barrels one last time, making sure they were secure. The return journey was even harder. The heavy wagons creaked and groaned over every bump, water sloshing dangerously. They had to stop often to rest the straining horses. The sun was setting by the time they reached the ranch, casting long shadows across the dusty yard. Cattle crowded around as they began unloading, their thirst making them bold. Joshua and Lena worked quickly to fill the troughs while Avery helped steady the heavy barrels. Her arms felt like lead, but she gritted her teeth and kept working until the last barrel was emptied out as the cattle finally drank their fill. Joshua found Avery leaning against the corral fence, exhausted but proud. He studied her for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "You're stronger than most men I've known," he said quietly. "Not just in body, but in spirit. To keep going like that, never complaining." Avery felt tears spring to her eyes, but she smiled faintly. "My mother always said true strength comes from the heart." Joshua's weathered face softened. She was right about that. Lena called them into a late supper of beans and cornbread. They ate in weary silence, the lamp casting flickering shadows on the walls. After the dishes were cleared, Lena bid them good night, leaving Joshua and Avery alone at the table. Joshua pulled out the ranch documents again, spreading them across the scarred wood. His face was troubled as he studied the papers, running a hand through his graying hair. Avery watched him for a moment, then moved to sit beside him. Gently, she laid her hand over his where it rested on the papers. His fingers were rough and calloused against hers, but they stopped their restless movement. At her touch, "Talk to me," she said softly. Joshua was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with worry. "I've worked this land for 15 years, put everything I had into it. My wife and son are buried on that hill yonder." He swallowed hard. "But it's not just the land I'm afraid of losing. I couldn't bear to lose your trust. To have you think I brought you here just to watch it all fall apart." Avery's heart ached at the pain in his voice. She tightened her grip on his hand, making him look at her. "You won't lose me," she said firmly. "Whatever happens, I'm here because I choose to be. Because you saw value in me when no one else did. That trust goes both ways." The lamplight caught the sheen of tears in Joshua's eyes before he blinked them away. He turned his hand to clasp hers properly, rough palm against soft. They sat there in companionable silence, drawing strength from each other as the night deepened. Around them, outside, a coyote called lonely across the darkened pastures. But inside, in the warm circle of lamplight, two souls found anchor in their shared determination to face whatever tomorrow might bring. The morning sun beat down mercilessly as Joshua and Avery worked to repair a broken fence near the creek bed. The dry earth cracked beneath their boots, and dust devils danced across the parched pasture. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both look up, squinting against the glare. Halpern rode at the head of 6 mounted men, their horses' hooves kicking up clouds of dust as they approached. The rancher's face wore its usual smirk, but his eyes were cold as winter frost. Behind him, his men carried rifles across their saddles, trying to look casual but failing. Joshua straightened slowly, his stance protective as he moved. Slightly in front of Avery, his voice carried across the distance, steady and clear. "This is private property, Halpern." The riders drew up 20 paces away. Halpern's horse, a tall bay stallion, pawed restlessly at the ground. "Private for now," Halpern drawled, his tone mock-friendly. "But times are changing, Joshua. Railroad's coming whether you like it or not. That's so while you can still get a fair price." "Fair price?" Joshua's laugh held no humor. "There's nothing fair about stealing a man's water and trying to force his hand." Halpern's face hardened. "Don't be a fool. You're already cut off from the creek. How long can your cattle last, hauling water from that spring? A week? 2? He leaned forward in his saddle. "I'm offering you a way out before things get worse. Is that a threat?" Joshua's hand didn't move toward his gun, but his stance shifted slightly. The tension crackled like lightning before a storm. Halpern's men stirred, hands drifting toward their weapons. The horses sensed the building tension, tossing their heads nervously. "Just stating facts," Halpern replied smoothly. Accidents happen out here. Wells can collapse. Fences can break. Cattle can disappear. Joshua's jaw tightened. Get off my land. You're making a mistake. Halpern's voice turned hard as iron. Last chance, Joshua. Sell now, or the getting of treasures by a lying tongue is a vanity tossed to and fro. Of them that seek death. Avery's clear voice cut through the tension like a bell ringing. She stepped forward, her face pale but determined as she quoted the scripture. Every head turned toward her, surprise evident on the rough faces of Halpern's men. Proverbs chapter 21, verse 6, she continued, her voice growing stronger. But they that deal truly are his delight. She met Halpern's startled gaze directly. Would you stand before the Lord and claim your dealings are true, Mr. Halpern? The armed men shifted uncomfortably in their saddles. Several wouldn't meet her eyes, their faces troubled. One crossed himself reflexively. Halpern's face darkened with rage. You dare preach at me, girl? I dare speak truth, Avery replied steadily. The robbery of the wicked shall destroy them, because they refuse to do judgment. A murmur ran through Halpern's men. One of them actually backed his horse a few steps, looking distinctly unsettled. The scripture, spoken so boldly by this young woman they'd expected to cower, struck deeper than any threat of violence. Halpern's face worked with fury, but he could feel his men's resolve wavering. You'll regret this, he spat. He yanked his horse's head around sharply. Let's go. The riders wheeled their mounts, following their boss back across the pasture. The thunder of hoofbeats faded slowly into the distance, leaving behind a ringing. Silenced out, Joshua turned to Avery, his expression a mix of concern and admiration. That was dangerous, he said quietly. Halpern's not a man to cross lightly. I couldn't stay silent, Avery replied, though her hands trembled slightly now that the danger had passed. Not while he threatened everything you've built here. Joshua's eyes softened as he looked at her. You showed more courage than any of those men with guns. He touched her shoulder gently. But please be careful. I couldn't bear it if anything happened to you. The tenderness in his voice made Avery's heart skip a beat. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. They finished repairing the fence in companionable silence, but Avery's mind was far from the work. The day's confrontation had shaken loose something inside her, bringing feelings she'd been avoiding into sharp focus. That night, sleep proved elusive. Avery paced the wooden floors of her small room, moonlight streaming through the window. Her bare feet made soft sounds on the planks as she moved back and forth, her thoughts whirling like autumn leaves in a wind. She paused at the window, looking out at the silver-painted landscape. The ranch stretched peaceful under the stars, cattle, dark shapes in the distant pastures. Somewhere out there, Joshua's wife and son lay beneath the prairie grass, their graves marked by a wooden cross she could just make out on the hillside. The thought sent a pang through her heart. She'd come here seeking only sanctuary from her father's cruelty, grateful for Joshua's kindness. But somewhere along the way, that gratitude had transformed into something deeper, something that both thrilled and frightened her. She recognized it now. The way her heart lifted when he smiled, how his voice saying her name made her pulse quicken, the peace she felt simply working beside him. She'd fallen in love with Joshua, as naturally as a seed taking root in fertile soil. The realization sent her to her knees beside the bed, hands clasped tightly. Lord, she whispered into the darkness, I need your guidance. Show me the path you would have me walk. She prayed for wisdom to face the coming hearing, for strength to stand against Halpern's threats. But mostly she prayed about the feelings growing in her heart. This love for a man still grieving his lost family. Was it right to hope? Could she dare to dream of a future here, not just as someone Joshua had rescued, but as someone he might come to love? The moon trekked slowly across the sky as Avery knelt there, pouring out her heart in silent prayer. She asked for courage to face whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, whether in the courthouse or here on the ranch. And she prayed for patience, willing to wait on God's timing rather than rush ahead with her own desires. When she finally rose, her knees stiff from the hard floor, a measure of peace had settled over her heart. The path ahead might not be clear, but she knew she wouldn't walk it alone. Whatever came next, the hearing, Halpern's threats, her growing feelings for Joshua, she would face it with faith and the quiet strength she'd found within herself. She slipped into bed as the first hint of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. Though sleep remained distant, her heart felt lighter. She had chosen her path, putting her trust in something greater than herself. Whatever tomorrow might bring, she would meet it with courage, faith, and love. The eastern sky blushed pink. As Joshua's wagon rolled away from the ranch, Avery sat beside him, smoothing the borrowed calico dress over her lap. The fabric was soft with age but carefully mended, a deep blue that reminded her of prairie gentians. Lena had helped her dress that morning, weaving tiny braids at her temples and pinning them back. "You look like sunrise," Lena had said warmly, adjusting the collar. "Strong and beautiful." Now, as the wagon swayed along the rutted road, Avery fought the flutter of nerves in her stomach. This journey to town felt different from the last, not just because of the dress, but because of how much had changed inside her. The harsh whispers and stares that had once cut so deep seemed to matter less now. Joshua glanced at her, his expression soft in the morning light. "That dress suits you." "Lena insisted," Avery replied, catching the neat row of buttons. "Said I couldn't go to church in work clothes." She was right. Joshua clicked to the horses, guiding them around a deep rut. "Though you look fine in whatever you wear." The simple compliment warmed Avery's cheeks. They rode in comfortable silence as the sun climbed higher, the morning air sweet with wild sage. A meadowlark trilled from a fence post, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called its morning song. The church bells were ringing 9 o'clock when they reached town. Already, buggies and wagons lined the dusty street. Women in their Sunday best helped children down from wagon beds while men stood in small groups, talking quietly. Joshua pulled the wagon to a stop, then came around to help Avery down. His hand was warm and steady as she stepped to the ground. Instead of releasing her immediately, he tucked her hand into the crook of his arm. Heads turned as they walked toward the white-painted church. Avery heard the whispers start, saw the pointed looks, but this time was different. Joshua's arm was firm beneath her hand, his stride confident. He nodded to people as they passed, and some nodded back with cautious respect. The church interior was cool and dim after the bright morning Sunlight filtered through plain glass windows, catching dust motes and golden beams. The wooden pews were already filling with families. Joshua led them to a spot near the middle, stepping aside to let Avery enter first. As they settled, Avery noticed Mrs. Peterson, the pastor's wife, watching them with warm approval from her seat near the front. The older woman's smile gave Avery courage as more people filed in, their curious glances less subtle now. The service began with a familiar hymn. Avery's voice joined the others, growing stronger with each verse. She felt Joshua's shoulder brush hers as he sang, his deep voice steady and true. The simple act of worship together filled her heart with peace. After the final prayer, people began to rise, gathering in small groups to visit before heading home. Joshua kept Avery's hand on his arm as they moved toward the door. Several people stepped forward to greet them, including Thomas Miller, one of the town council members. "Good to see you, Joshua," Miller said, his wife nodding beside him, "and Miss Avery." Before Avery could respond, Joshua spoke clearly. "Thank you, Thomas. I'd like you to know that Avery is my partner now, in life. And in faith." The words rang in the sudden quiet. Avery's heart seemed to stop, then race ahead. She felt the weight of every eye upon them, heard the swift intake of breath from those nearby. Mrs. Miller recovered first, her face softening into a genuine smile. "How wonderful," she said warmly. "We've all seen how much good you've done for each other." Others pressed forward then, offering hesitant congratulations. Some faces showed surprise, others approval. A few women who had once whispered cruel things behind their hands now looked uncertain, even ashamed. Avery stood tall beside Joshua, accepting each greeting with quiet dignity. The afternoon passed in a blur of small gatherings and quiet conversations. The pastor's wife insisted they stay for dinner, serving a simple but filling meal of chicken and dumplings. As the sun began to set, Joshua and Avery found themselves sitting alone on the church steps, watching the sky paint itself in shades of gold and purple. "I haven't smiled this much in years," Joshua said softly, breaking their comfortable silence. His weathered face was peaceful in the fading light. "Not since Sarah and the baby." Avery's heart ached for the pain she heard beneath his words. They'll always be part of you, she said gently. Joshua nodded, his eyes distant. Yes, but now, he turned to look at her, his gaze warm. Now I find myself looking forward instead of back. You've brought light back into my life, Avery. She ducked her head, overcome by emotion. I never dreamed I'd belong anywhere, she whispered. After Mama died and Father, she swallowed hard. But you gave me a home. More than that, you gave me purpose. Their hands rested close together on the wooden step, not quite touching. The space between them hummed with unspoken feelings, with possibilities not yet voiced. Inside the church, they could hear Mrs. Peterson moving about, preparing for evening prayers. The older woman paused at the window, smiling knowingly at the pair on the steps before turning away. The evening air grew cooler as shadows lengthened across the street. From the town hall, the curfew bells began to toll, their deep notes rolling across the quiet town. Each strike seemed to mark the passing of the old day, the coming of tomorrow with its final hearing. But for now, in this moment, Avery felt perfectly at peace. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Tonight was for savoring this new understanding between them, this precious sense of belonging. She breathed in the evening air, rich with the scent of Joshua's tobacco and the sweet grass of the prairie, and gave silent thanks for the treasure she had found in this unexpected place. Morning light streamed through the courthouse windows. As Avery sat beside Joshua on the wooden bench, her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed her dress, the same borrowed calico she had worn to church. The council chamber buzzed with whispers as townspeople filed in, filling every available space. Two railroad lawyers in crisp suits stepped forward, their polished boots clicking on the wooden floor. The taller one produced a leather folder with "Us." A flourish. "Members of the council," he announced, his voice carrying across the silent room. "We have obtained letters signed by Mr. Avery Sr. authorizing the sale of water rights to our company." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Avery felt Joshua stiffen beside her. When she dared to look up at him, his face had gone pale, his eyes filled with hurt and confusion as he stared at her. The weight of his gaze made her heart clench. "These documents," the lawyer continued, "clearly show that Mr. Sr. held legitimate claim to negotiate these rights through prior agreements." Avery's hands curled into fists in her lap. She could feel the room turning against her, could sense the old whispers starting again. But something inside her, some steel core of truth her mother had helped forge, would not bend to these lies. Rising on shaking legs, Avery stepped forward. "Those letters are false," she declared, her voice stronger than she felt. From her own satchel, she withdrew her mother's leather-bound ledgers. "I have the original records here, in my mother's own hand. Compare the signatures yourself." The council clerk, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles, took both sets of documents. For long minutes, the only sound was the scratch of papers being examined. Finally, he looked up. "The signatures on the railroad's letters do not match those in these ledgers. They appear to be forgeries." Relief swept through Avery like a cool breeze. The council members huddled together, speaking in low voices. When they turned back, the head councilman's verdict rang clear. "We find in favor of Mr. Joshua's claim. The water rights remain with his ranch." Halpern leaped to his feet with a curse, his face mottled red. He stormed from the chamber, shoving past onlookers. The railroad lawyers gathered their papers with tight lips and followed. The tension of the past week suddenly overwhelmed Avery. Tears spilled down her cheeks as the victory sank in. Joshua was there in an instant, gathering her close before everyone. "My treasure," he murmured against her hair, loud enough for all to hear. "My brave, precious treasure." The room erupted in murmurs, but this time they held notes of approval and understanding. Avery could feel the shift in the air, like storm clouds finally breaking to reveal clear sky. She had proven her truth, defended her home, and found her place at last. The wagon wheels crunched on gravel as Joshua and Avery returned to the ranch, sunset painting the sky in victory colors. Smoke curled from the chimney and delicious scents wafted from the kitchen where Lena had been busy all afternoon. Inside, the house glowed with warmth. Lena had outdone herself, preparing a feast fit for kings: golden brown roast chicken, steaming biscuits fresh from the oven, and 3 different pies cooling on the windowsill. The kitchen table groaned under the weight of the bounty. As word of their triumph spread, neighbors began arriving. Wagons rolled up one by one, bringing familiar faces that now were welcoming smiles. Some carried sacks of seed corn, others brought precious flour, gifts of support that brought tears to Avery's eyes. "We were wrong about you, miss," old Mrs. Henderson said, patting Avery's hand. "You've got more grit than most." The house filled with the sounds of celebration. Someone brought out a fiddle, and toe-tapping music filled the air. Lantern light cast warm shadows on the walls as people laughed and shared stories. Joshua stood before them all, his voice carrying clear above the happy din. "This woman saved not just my land," he declared, looking at Avery with shining eyes. "She restored my heart when I thought it was forever broken." As the evening wore on, Joshua drew Avery out onto the porch. Stars twinkled overhead, and crickets chirped their evening song. He took her hand in his weathered one, his touch gentle. "Avery," he said softly, "you've become more precious to me than all the water rights in Colorado. Would you stay here, not just as my partner, but as my wife?" Tears spilled down Avery's cheeks as joy filled her heart. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll stay." Inside, the celebration grew merrier. The fiddle played a joyful tune as neighbors danced. Lena led everyone in prayer, giving thanks for justice served and love found. The ranch house rang with laughter and song, no longer a place of lonely grief, but a home reborn through faith and courage. Through it all, Joshua kept Avery's hand in his, their fingers intertwined like their hearts, their future as bright as the lanterns glowing in the gathering dark. The morning dawned clear and bright, Colorado's vast sky stretching endless blue above the little white church. Inside, flowers decorated every window, their sweet scent mixing with polish and prayer books. Townsfolk filled the pews, their Sunday best brightening the simple space. Along the back rows sat several Navajo families, their presence a testament to bonds stronger than prejudice. Lena adjusted Avery's borrowed veil one last time, her dark eyes warm with pride. "You look beautiful," she whispered, squeezing Avery's trembling hands. Together they stood at the church doors, waiting for the piano to signal their entrance. The notes rang out clear and true. Avery's heart thundered as she took her first step, Lena steady beside her. Down the aisle she walked, past faces that once sneered, but now smiled. Her father's absence left an empty space that somehow hurt less today. Joshua stood at the altar, tall and strong in his best black coat. His eyes shone with tears as he watched her approach, and Avery felt her own vision blur. When their hands joined before the pastor, his gentle grip steadied her completely. Their vows rang through the hushed church, promises of love and faith echoing off ancient rafters. The golden ring slipped onto her finger felt like coming home, back. At the ranch, Joshua lifted her across the threshold with tender care. Their long table groaned with celebration dishes, filled with laughter and blessing. Avery had never seen so many smiles in one room. As evening painted the sky in purple and gold, they stepped onto the porch together. Joshua's arm settled warm around her shoulders. Below, the creek burbled strong and clear, water catching the last light like scattered gems. "I was never a burden," Avery whispered into the peaceful dusk. Joshua pulled her closer, his voice gentle but firm. "No, you were always my treasure." If something in this story whispered to your spirit, stay a while. Subscribe and come back tomorrow. The next story may be the one you didn't know you needed.